A floor shouldn't echo unless it's hiding something. The storm came in like it had something to prove. Wind howled across the Langford ranch, slamming against the sides of the barn, making the old wood creak like a warning. Eli Langford pressed his boot against the warped floorboard and pushed down hard. It groaned under his weight more than it should have. The sound wasn't right. The barn floor had always been solid, packed earth beneath timber laid by his grandfather's own hands. Tonight, though, something beneath his boots whispered back a hollow, low thunk, like knocking on a coffin lid. Rain pounded the roof. Lightning strobed through the cracks in the planks. Eli tightened his jaw and shifted the lantern in his hand. His pulse quickened even though he couldn't say why. 35 years of living on this land had taught him to trust what didn't sound right. He crouched, dragging the back of his calloused fingers along the grain of the floorboard. It was dry, splintered, and just barely loose near the corner post he'd been fixing earlier that afternoon. Another gust hit the barn doors. Something outside slammed a trough, maybe, but Eli didn't flinch. All his focus tunneled into that spot beneath his boots. He muttered to himself, "That's not right." He knocked again with the handle of his hammer. Thanks. Hollow. Definitely hollow. It had been 10 years since Jude disappeared his older brother, reckless and sharp-tongued, always talking about the old stories their father told about hidden rooms and old secrets. Eli had learned to shut those stories out after the funeral, but in this storm, with the wind breathing down his neck and the floor whispering back, he felt Jude like a ghost standing behind him. "Don't do this, Eli. You already know what happens when you start digging." He straightened, lantern casting long, nervous shadows on the walls, then went to his toolbox. The crowbar was cold in his hand. One good pull, and the board came up with a sharp snap. The smell hit him first, earth, damp and old, like something that hadn't seen the air in decades. Beneath him yawned a black square of nothing. He leaned forward and saw the outline of a staircase, wooden steps descending into a tunnel. Not random digging, not some animal burrow. This was built, deliberate, and the steps weren't covered in decades of dust like he expected. There were scuff marks, smooth edges. Someone had been walking on them. Lightning flared again. Eli tightened his grip on the lantern. A strange, almost physical chill licked his spine. He didn't like mysteries. Mysteries were what took Jude away. But the land was his responsibility. It always had been. His grandfather, Silas, had built this ranch from nothing. His father worked himself to the bone to keep it alive. And Eli had inherited not just the land, but the weight of its history. History that now had a hole in the floor. He knelt down, lantern trembling slightly in his hand, and peered deeper. The walls down there were timber-lined, old, but solid. Whoever built this had known what they were doing. It ran straight, not haphazard, like a shaft, like mine. "Jesus," he whispered. He didn't like how quiet it was. No critters, no dripping water, just the wind outside and the storm trying to get in. He lowered his boot to the first step. It was held. Another step. The wood groaned softly beneath his weight, but it didn't break. Lantern light flickered across the walls, catching on small carvings he didn't understand. They weren't decorative. They looked like markers. At the bottom, he crouched. The tunnel stretched into darkness, his lantern's glow disappearing into a throat of shadow. Dust coated the floor, but not evenly. There were fresh indentations, footprints, humans, adult-sized, one set. His pulse pounded against his ears. He was the only one with a key to this barn. The closest neighbor was 6 miles away. Eli reached for the revolver holstered at his belt, not because he expected to use it, but because the cold weight in his palm made the fear quieter. He walked forward slowly. The air was cooler here, heavier, as if the earth itself was pressing down. Lantern light caught a shape in the corner. A chair. a damn leather chair facing the entrance like someone had been waiting. Next to it sat a small table with a tin cup still damp with water. Beside it, a plate with crumbs. Someone had been living here, not hiding. Living. Eli's stomach knotted. It didn't make sense. He'd been working this ranch alone for years. No strange trucks, no signs of squatters. He swallowed hard. Who the hell? There were personal things too, a folded wool blanket, books stacked neatly against the wall, a lantern still warm to the touch. That's when he saw it. One of the books had a name scrawled on the inside cover, written in the sharp, deliberate penmanship he'd grown up tracing on old ledgers. Silas Langford, 1871. His grandfather. The ground tilted beneath him, not literally, but the way the world tilts when everything you've believed just cracks. Why the hell had Silas built a tunnel beneath the barn? Eli crouched, breathing slow and shallow. He forced his shaking hand to unlatch a small metal box beneath the table. Inside were brittle envelopes, documents with ink that had faded to the color of ash, and a photograph. 3 men, standing in front of this very barn when it was still new. One was Silas Langford, the other 2 strangers. The back of the photo had one line in that same penmanship. The agreement holds. No one speaks. He didn't hear the first creak. Or maybe he did, and his brain just refused to process it. But the second was unmistakable boots against floorboards. Directly above him. Eli froze. His grip on the lantern tightened until it creaked. He wasn't alone. Whoever had been down here had come back. He slowly turned off the lantern wick, plunging the tunnel into darkness. The only sound was the storm above and the measured, deliberate footsteps on the barn floor. They weren't in a hurry. They weren't lost. They were confident. Whoever this was knew the way. The steps stopped right over the hole he'd opened. Eli could hear the wood flex slightly under their weight. He could smell faint rain and saddle leather. Then a woman's voice, clear and calm, cut through the storm. "You can come up now, Eli. I know you're down there." His breath caught in his throat. She knew his name. She knew. His hand hovered over the gun again, though he didn't draw it. Instead, he pressed himself against the cold tunnel wall, forcing his heartbeat to quiet. "Who are you?" His voice came out lower, steadier than he felt. "That's exactly what I'm here to explain," she called back. "But I'd rather not yell through the floor. Why don't you come up?" Lightning cracked again. For a moment, Eli saw her silhouette through the gap in the boards. A woman in a dark raincoat, shoulders square, no weapon in sight, but everything about her said she was here with purpose. He could stay in the dark, but that wouldn't stop whatever this was from coming. And this was his land. Eli exhaled slowly. He struck the lantern back to life and climbed the staircase, every step heavy with the weight of something older than him, something buried deep beneath Stillwater's soil. When he pushed the barn floorboard aside and came face to face with her, the wind howled louder, as if the land itself had been waiting for this moment. She looked at him with the kind of eyes that already knew the ending. She took one step forward, extended a gloved hand, and said evenly, "My name's Grace Harrow. And what you just found under your barn doesn't belong to you alone." Eli's jaw tightened as the storm rattled the walls around them. Whatever he'd stepped into wasn't just an old tunnel. It was history, alive, dangerous, and ready to swallow him whole. "If I didn't walk down here, who the hell did?" Eli Langford didn't take her hand. He stared at Grace Harrow like a man still reeling from a punch he didn't see coming. She didn't flinch, just let her hand fall calmly back to her side as thunder cracked overhead. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe mid-30s, but there was nothing soft about her. Sharp eyes, severe ponytail, that look of someone who knew how deep secrets could rot. Start talking, Eli said, voice low. Grace nodded toward the barn doors. Not here. Someone could ride up. I need you to show me what's down there first. Then I'll tell you everything. Eli didn't move. How do you know my name? Because I've been tracking your family for a year, she said. I didn't show up by accident, Eli. I came because the deadline's almost up. What deadline? Grace held up a weathered folder, its edges curling from years of handling. The one your grandfather signed in 1871. They descended into the tunnel. Eli's lantern flickered against the carved walls as Grace followed him down, ducking under the low entry. As the room came into view, her expression didn't shift. No surprise, no hesitation. She walked straight to the table, ran her fingers along the surface, then looked at the plate with crumbs and the still damp tin cup. He's been here recently, she said. Eli frowned. He? Whoever's been keeping this place up. This isn't just some forgotten cellar. Someone's been living down here. I thought that someone was you, she snorted. I wish. This is the first time I've set foot on this land. She turned to face him. But I've studied it. My grandfather drew maps, left journals, documents. I've known about this tunnel for years, just never had the nerve to come until now. Eli folded his arms, watching her. So tell me what's in that folder. Grace laid it flat on the table and opened it to a yellowed page. Faded ink, cursive handwriting. At the end of the Civil War, 3 men came here and found something they didn't want anyone else to know about. Silver. Lots of it. Enough to make them all rich. Eli glanced back toward the tunnel. There's no silver in this room. No, she agreed, because they kept it hidden, mined it in secret, smuggled it out in pieces. They built this tunnel to hide what they found and sealed it with a contract. She pointed to the signatures. Silas Langford, Thomas Harrow, William Cross. Eli felt the heat rise in his chest. You're saying my grandfather was part of this? Grace looked him dead in the eye. He was one of the architects. The contract states that each family gets 1/3 of the land and the profits, but only after the last original signer dies. Until then, they'd keep it quiet, make it look like a single-family ranch. Why? To avoid taxes, territorial claims, government seizure. They'd found a fortune and didn't want to lose it to paperwork. Eli ran a hand down his face. You expect me to believe my grandfather ran a secret mining operation under our barn and never told a soul? He told 2, Grace said, Harrow and Cross, and they told their children who told theirs. My father never spoke of it, but he kept the records. I only found them after he passed. Eli's mind raced. Silas had died when Eli was 14. A stern man, closed off, a man who rarely shared more than weather reports at dinner. Could he have carried a secret like this? His gaze drifted to the photo again of the 3 men in front of the barn. His grandfather was younger then, and so were the 2 strangers. But something was off about the 3rd man's face, familiar in a way Eli couldn't place. He looked at Grace. So, if this is real and the contract is about to expire, what happens then? Grace folded the folder closed. That's what I'm here to find out, whether you're willing to honor it or try to keep the whole thing for yourself. Eli stepped back, arms tensed. You think I knew about this? I just found this place an hour ago. Grace tilted her head. Maybe, but someone's known, because someone's been down here long before you or me. Eli's jaw tightened. If I didn't walk down here, who the hell did? They both turned toward the far end of the tunnel. Eli moved slowly, lanterns held high, casting their shadows long against the wall. Grace followed, her boots silent on the packed floor. The tunnel narrowed into a corridor that sloped deeper underground. About 30 feet in, they found another room, this one smaller. Inside, wooden shelves lined the walls. Crates, some opened, others nailed shut. A metal stove sat cold in the corner, and a cot blanket folded tight, pillow fluffed. Grace crouched beside the cot. She picked up a matchbook and struck one. "Still lights," she said. "Hasn't been that long." Eli moved toward a chest in the corner. Inside, canned food, a water filter, and more books. He flipped one open, no name inside, but underlined passages in blue ink. "Recently." "This isn't old," he said. "This isn't abandoned." Grace nodded slowly. "Then someone knew we'd come." Back in the main chamber, Eli lit the stove, needing something to ground him. The soft hiss of flame brought a small sense of normalcy to an otherwise insane evening. Grace stood with her arms crossed, staring at the old photo again. "That third man," she said. "I've seen that face somewhere, but not in my family's files." Eli looked over. "Could be Cross, the other singer." "Maybe. Or someone else they trusted." She turned toward him. "I need to ask you something. Did your family ever mention anyone named Jude?" Eli frozen. His brother's name cut through him like a blade. "Why?" Grace's voice softened. "I found a letter. Among my dad's things, it referenced a man named Jude Langford, said he'd come asking about the land, about what lay beneath. Then he vanished. No trace." Eli's hands curled into fists. "Jude was my brother." "I'm sorry," Grace said. "I didn't know." "He disappeared 10 years ago," Eli said flatly. "Rode out one day, never came back." He stared at the floor, his voice suddenly rough. "I thought he left. Couldn't handle the ranch. Now—" "Maybe he found this place," Grace said gently. "Maybe he got too close." A heavy silence fell between them. Then, above them, boots, sharp, deliberate, crossing the barn floor. Grace's head jerked up. "Did you lock the doors?" Eli nodded. "Only I have a key." Another voice echoed down male this time, calm, cold, commanding. "Miss Harrow. We know you're here. And Mr. Langford, we know you found the entrance. It's time we all had a talk." Grace's face went pale. Eli reached for his revolver. "Who the hell is that?" he asked. Grace whispered, "It has to be the Cross family." Eli felt a rush of heat in his chest. "They've been watching this place?" "More than that," Grace said. "They might have been living in it." The boots stopped directly above the entrance. A pause. Then wood scraped against wood, the unmistakable sound of another hidden panel opening. Eli turned to Grace, voice low. "There's more than one way in?" She nodded. "3, according to the maps." Then came another sound of boots on the stairs, but not the ones they used. From the far end of the tunnel, a warm orange glow flickered, growing brighter. 3 silhouettes emerged in the distance. The man in front stepped into the light, tall, greying, eyes like frozen stone. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Evening," he said. "Name's Reuben Cross, and I believe we have some unfinished business." The other door, when the past walks in wearing boots and a name that still holds power. "This land never truly belonged to your family. It was always shared, just buried under silence." Reuben Cross didn't wait for permission. He walked into the chamber like he owned the dirt beneath his feet. Behind him, his 2 sons flanked each side, younger, but built just like him, broad shoulders, sharp eyes, boots that had seen just as much grit as their fathers. One carried a lantern, the other kept a hand near the butt of a sidearm. Neither looked nervous. Eli Langford stood firm between them and Grace, jaw clenched, revolver hanging loosely at his side, not pointed, not holstered. "Evening," Reuben said again, voice polite in the way only old rivals could be. "Didn't expect the reunion to be quite so soon. But I suppose once secrets start breaking ground, it doesn't take long for the rest to spill out." Grace straightened beside Eli. You knew we'd be here. Reuben smiled, just enough to show he was enjoying this. I've known for a while that someone would come snooping. Just didn't think it'd be you, Miss Harrow, though I suppose it was bound to happen now that the contract's running out. Eli took a step forward. You've been down here. Reuben's eyebrows lifted as if the answer were obvious. Course we have. You think this place kept itself from rotting? My boys and I. He nodded to his sons. We've been maintaining the tunnels for years, reinforcing the supports, watching the place. Grace's voice was flat. Watching who? Reuben didn't answer right away. He stepped further into the chamber, running his fingers along the edge of the wooden table like he was reacquainting himself with an old friend. This land never truly belonged to your family, he said, glancing at Eli. Or mine? Or hers? It was always shared, just buried under silence. That was the agreement. That was the cost. Cost of what? Eli asked. Lying? No, Reuben said. Survival. He pulled a rolled-up document from inside his coat and dropped it onto the table. The seal had been cracked, but the parchment was intact. Eli recognized the handwriting the second he saw it. Silas Langford. Grace unrolled the document. Her eyes moved across the text quickly, lips tightening. It's another copy, she said, of the original agreement, but this one's cleaner, more detailed. Reuben nodded. 3 families, 3 bloodlines, equal share of whatever was under this land, the silver, the land itself, even the tunnel system. Eli looked down at the words, reading slowly. In the event that all original signers are deceased and the term of silence has passed, the descendants shall gather to divide equally that which remains. He exhaled through his nose. My grandfather never told me any of this. Mine neither, Grace added. I found out by accident, Reuben scoffed. You think any of us were supposed to know? Our grandfathers didn't trust anyone, not even their own children. It was always about control, containment. The fewer people knew, the safer it stayed. Eli shook his head, still trying to piece it all together. And now you want what you're third. Reuben's eyes sharpened. I want what's owed, nothing more. Grace moved to the shelves, brushing her hand along the empty spaces where ore might have been stored. The problem is, there's nothing here anymore. Reuben's jaw twitched. We noticed. You said you've been watching, Eli said. So how did it all vanish under your nose? Reuben's sons stiffened, clearly not used to being questioned, but Reuben just smiled again, more bitter this time. Because someone else was down here, someone who knew the routes, knew the entrances. Knew how to move product without leaving a damn trail. Grace stepped closer. You think it was one of us? I know it wasn't me, Reuben snapped, and it sure as hell wasn't my boys. We've been protecting this place. From who? Grace asked. Your own family? From outsiders, Reuben shot back. From thieves, from people who'd rather see this place bulldozed than divided. Eli held up a hand, grounding the tension. All right, let's assume none of us took it. Then who did? Silence stretched, heavy with possibility. Grace finally spoke. Someone who knew about the contract, the timing, the system. Someone outside the 3 families, but close enough to learn the truth. Eli's mind raced. Jude, the letter, the trail, the footprints in the tunnel that weren't his, weren't Grace's, weren't Cross's. Someone else had been here. Someone who might have known about the ore and taken it long before they arrived. Reuben leaned in, voice low and even. There's more to this place than just the chambers you've seen. There are sealed sections. My father told me once before he lost his mind that they built vaults, hidden chambers at the far end, stuff they didn't even tell their kids about. Grace looked up. Vaults? Reuben nodded. We're not in the deepest part of the tunnel yet. Eli turned to Grace. Your grandfather's map. Does it show more? She hesitated, then reached into her satchel and pulled out a folded page. It was yellow with age, creased at the corners, but the lines were clear, 3 separate chambers connected by a main artery. 2 were marked open. 1 was marked sealed, do not disturb. She tapped the last one. This room, my grandfather called it the cut, said it was the most heavily protected. I figured it was just superstition. Reuben's eyes locked on the map. It's not. That's where the main ore vein ran, the richest deposit. Eli looked between them. And you think it's still sealed? It was, Reuben said, until we heard it open 2 nights ago. Grace's eyes widened. What? Reuben nodded grimly. We were checking the supports when we heard scraping. From behind the sealed panel, someone pried it open. We thought maybe the Harrows got curious. Grace shook her head. We never came. Eli stepped back, staring down the tunnel's dark throat. The air suddenly felt colder. Then someone else has been watching all of us. Bootsteps echoed again this time, from the far end of the tunnel. 3 heads turned. Lantern light glowed faintly, flickering. Not theirs. Reuben's sons reached for their weapons. Grace grabbed Eli's arm. Eli's voice was a whisper. We're not alone. As the footsteps drew closer, a voice called out from the shadows. Female, older, laced with the kind of anger that had been aged like whiskey and sharpened like glass. You've had 50 years to honor the truth. Now it's my turn. Grace froze. I know that voice. Eli's stomach dropped. Who is it? The figure stepped into the light. Long grey hair, eyes like ice, a worn coat dusted with earth. My name is Lucia Vasquez, she said, and my grandfather died for the silver you're all standing on. The forgotten name, when the truth finally speaks with a voice sharpened by bloodline and betrayal. You think you've found a secret. We've been living in it for months. For a long moment, no one spoke. Lucia Vasquez stood just outside the edge of their lantern light, the long shadows from the tunnel casting her figure in something almost ghost-like. Her voice echoed in Eli's ears long after it had left her lips. Not just because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Not angry, not unhinged, just certain, like someone who'd spent decades putting pieces together and was now watching the last one fall into place. Grace was the first to move. Lucia, she breathed, her voice half question, half recognition. You were at the county archives 3 months ago, Lucia nodded, looking for the same thing you were. But unlike you, I already knew what I'd find. Reuben stepped in front of his sons, his stance wide, arms tense. Why are you here, Vasquez? Lucia's eyes flicked to him, unimpressed. Because this land was never yours, or Langford's, or Harrow's, and it's time you heard the truth from someone who doesn't carry your family's lies in their blood. Eli stepped forward. You said your grandfather died for the silver. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked past them slow and steady until she reached the center of the chamber. Her coat brushed the floor. Her fingers skimmed the edge of the empty crates. She looked around the room like it was a mausoleum. It wasn't always like this, she said. There was a time when Stillwater was just a name on a ridge. Nothing here but hills, trees, and dreams. She turned back toward them. And then my grandfather, Roberto Vasquez, found the vein, Reuben scoffed. That's not what the agreement says. Of course it doesn't, Lucia snapped, because your grandfathers killed the man who made the discovery, buried him in his own mine, and wrote their names over his like carving over a gravestone. Silence fell again, this time heavier. Grace spoke, voice tight. Do you have proof? Lucia reached into her coat and pulled out a leather journal, its spine cracked and pages browned by age and weather. She handed it directly to Eli. My grandfather's journal. He recorded everything, the discovery, the meetings with your grandfathers, the suspicion, the betrayal. His final entry was written the night before he disappeared. Eli flipped through it. The handwriting was delicate but deliberate, Spanish mixed with English, page after page of observations, drawings, measurements, then one entry circled in red ink. They've asked to meet again tomorrow. They say it's to finalize the partnership. I want to believe them, but I've seen the looks, the way they speak when they think I don't understand. If anything happens to me, this journal will speak for me. He swallowed. His fingers trembled. Reuben leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Anyone could have written that. Maybe, Lucia said, but not just anyone would know where the body was buried. Everyone frozen. What? Grace asked. Lucia turned slowly, pointing toward the far end of the tunnel, the sealed section marked the cut on Grace's map. 3 months ago, I opened that chamber, and I found what your family's buried. Not silver, not wealth, but bones. The air thickened. Eli felt the chill crawl up his spine again, the kind of cold that didn't come from the air. You're saying Roberto Vasquez was murdered, he said, and buried in the mine he found. Lucia looked straight at him. I'm not saying it. I know it. Reuben's sons stirred behind him. One of them, Matt, the older one, spoke up. That doesn't prove our grandfather did it. Maybe he died in an accident. Mines collapse. Lucia's expression didn't flinch. Not with a bullet hole in the back of the skull. That shut everyone up. She let the silence hang before continuing. You think you found a secret, she said, but we've been living in it for months. Eli frowned. We? Lucia stepped back toward the tunnel, her voice echoing again. Not just me. I've had help. People who knew what this land meant. People who wanted justice. We've been working our way through these tunnels all year, extracting what was ours, piece by piece. You took the silver, Reuben growled. I reclaimed it, she corrected. It was never yours, and it damn sure wasn't your grandfather's. Eli looked down at the journal again. The words blurred slightly as a wave of nausea hit him. He thought about Silas Langford, his cold silence, his secrets, his long absences from the house when Eli was just a kid. He used to say he was checking the land. Now Eli wondered what exactly he'd been checking on. Grace's voice cut through his thoughts. Why now, Lucia? Why wait until the contract is about to expire? Lucia looked at her, and for the first time her voice softened. Because I wanted you all to see it. I wanted you to stand here, face to face with what your families did. You needed to see what it cost, and you needed to watch it slip through your fingers. Reuben's voice came out low, dangerous. You better be real damn sure that silver didn't end up somewhere traceable. Lucia turned slowly, fixing him with a calm, steady stare. It's already been melted, moved, and turned into foundations for schools and clinics across the Southwest. No one's coming for it. No one's tracing it. That silver's already feeding families in towns where the name Vasquez means something. Reuben clenched his fists. This is theft. This is justice, she replied. Eli stepped between them. Enough. His voice cut through the rising tension like a blade. Everyone turned to look at him. He held the journal in one hand, his lantern in the other. I don't know if I can believe all of this yet, he said, but I believe what I read, and I know what I saw under that floor. That tunnel wasn't some accident. It was built for a reason, and it wasn't to hide silver. It was to bury the truth. Grace looked down. Reuben stared like he wanted to speak, but couldn't find the words. Lucia exhaled, the fire in her fading just slightly. We're not done, she said. There's still more back there, more they sealed off. Eli met her gaze. Then show me. Lucia nodded once and turned back toward the tunnel. She lit her own lantern, oil-fed, and started walking. The rest of them followed. At the mouth of the sealed chamber, she paused. You want the rest of the truth? It's behind this wall, what your grandfathers feared most. Eli stepped forward, heart pounding. As Lucia pressed her hand against a false panel and pushed, the wall shifted with a groan of old wood and forgotten guilt, and the cold air that spilled out smelled not of dust, but of metal and blood. The vanishing silver. The sealed vault is open, but what's missing says more than what's left behind. Whoever took it knew every inch of this tunnel and every lie buried with it. The hidden door groaned as it gave way. Lucia's lantern lit the path first, casting flickering light across the chamber beyond. The air that spilled out was stale, thick with old metal and the faint sting of rot. Eli stepped through second, followed by Grace and Reuben. Reuben's sons hung back for a moment, as if unsure whether this was sacred ground or something worse. The room stretched longer than it appeared from outside. The ceiling arched slightly, supported by thick beams. Along each wall ran what used to be meticulously built shelving, dozens of compartments, empty. Dust clung to the wood like a shroud. Tools lay scattered on the ground, pickaxes, chisels, mining pans. Some were old, rusted from years of exposure. Others were disturbingly clean. Too clean. Reuben's boot kicked a small metal crate. It rolled a few inches before coming to a stop with a hollow clank. Lucia held her lantern high and said it before anyone else could. "It's all gone." Eli scanned the room slowly. This was the vault. Grace picked up one of the discarded tools, turning it in her hands. This should have been full. Even if they stopped mining decades ago, there should have been something left. Reuben knelt beside one of the shelving units, running his fingers through a faint trail in the dust. His brow furrowed. "Someone's been pulling ore out of here, recently." "How can you tell?" Eli asked. He held up a handful of fine particles, watching them fall like ash. "This isn't decades-old dust. It's new. You can feel it." Grace moved toward the center of the room. Her eyes landed on a torn scrap of paper peeking out from beneath a beam. She bent, gently prying it loose. "Hey," she said. "This looks like a transport document." Reuben was at her side in a second. She read aloud, "Shipment bulk ore. Quantity unspecified. Destination illegible." She flipped it. The back was blank, except for a date, 3 months ago. Eli's stomach dropped. "That's the same month you said you started waiting for me to find the tunnel," he said to Grace. She nodded, slowly. "I thought I was alone." Lucia stepped between them. "You weren't. None of us were." Reuben's son, Matt, spoke up from near the tunnel mouth. "Something's off. Look at these pickaxes. These handles, they're new, not even weathered." His younger brother added, "And those support beams, they've been replaced." "No way these are 100 years old." Lucia turned in a slow circle, letting her light scan the chamber again. Her expression darkened. "They weren't just hiding the silver here. They were still working at this mine. Someone's been extracting ore under your noses. They knew the layout. They knew the schedule. They knew where the real value was." Grace's eyes met Eli's. Whoever took it knew every inch of this tunnel and every lie buried with it. Eli's thoughts spiraled. The footprints, the damp cup, the living quarters are hidden inside a secret room. The matchbook that is still lit. The tools are freshly used. And then, a memory. 10 years ago. Jude. Staring at the barn floor like he saw something nobody else did. "Do you ever think there's more to this place?" Jude had said, half drunk, half joking. "I bet Silas left something. The old man didn't say 10 words without hiding 5. Back then, Eli had laughed it off. Now he wasn't so sure. He turned back toward the tunnel. "There's more to this than silver." Reuben frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I think someone's been planning this for a long time," Eli said. "They didn't just steal what was here. They timed it. They knew exactly when the contract was expiring. They knew it would draw us all here at the same time. Lucia narrowed her eyes. You think someone manipulated us into coming? Grace nodded slowly. To turn us against each other. Why? Reuben barked. Who benefits from that? Lucia answered softly. The person who already took everything. If we spend all our energy blaming each other, we'll never look for them. Eli paced, trying to find the missing piece. There has to be someone else who knew, he said. Someone outside the family. Maybe someone who found out after the fact. Someone who pieced it together. Grace's brow furrowed. There was someone, a lawyer, sort of. Eli looked at her sharply. What do you mean? When I found the contract in my father's chest, I had questions. I didn't know what it meant. A man reached out to me, said he was holding documents for the Harrow family, passed down since the 1800s. His name was Edwards. Reuben folded his arms. Never heard of him. He had an office above the general store in Millfield, Grace said. Small space. Said he'd been waiting for the right time to pass along the records. Eli shook his head. That office has been empty for years. Grace stared at him. What? I grew up in Millfield, he said. That store closed 5 years ago. The upstairs has been boarded up since. Lucia muttered, You're saying he gave you forged documents? No, Grace said. The documents were real, old paper, real ink, but the story might have been planted. Reuben slammed a fist against the wall. Damn it! We've been baited! Matt Cross stepped forward, clutching a small, torn envelope he found near the tool crates. Dad, look at this! He handed it over. Reuben squinted at the faded ink. The front simply read, To Jude Langford. Eli felt the breath leave his body. He snatched the envelope. Inside was a half-burned letter, edges singed, but enough remained to read, When the time comes, you'll know what to do. But it must appear that they discovered it themselves. Let the weight of their history be what buries them, not your hand. It wasn't signed, but there in the corner a faint watermark, a stylized V. Lucia stared at it, face pale. That's my family seal, Grace whispered. Your family's playing both sides. Lucia's lips parted, but no words came. Eli looked up, eyes narrowing. Whoever orchestrated this knew about Jude. They knew how to manipulate all of us. They're not done. Reuben's face was like stone. Then we better find them before they decide we've outlived our usefulness. From deep in the tunnel, a sound echoed, a slow, deliberate clap, all 5 frozen. Then a voice, female, older, confidence. Well done, it said. You're finally catching up. They turned toward the source. A silhouette stepped into view. A woman, maybe in her 60s, silver hair, leather coat, calm eyes. She stopped just at the edge of the light. I've waited 30 years to say this, she said. I'm the daughter of Roberto Vasquez, and I'm the reason your legacy is about to end. The cursed bloodline truths no contract could contain begin to surface. My grandfather found the silver, and your grandfathers found a bullet. The woman stepped fully into the light, slow and sure, like she'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. Eli watched her closely, tall silver hair pulled back, dark coat soaked with the damp of the tunnel. Her eyes didn't search the room. They locked on each face, one by one, like taking attendance in a courtroom. She stopped at the center of the chamber and set down a leather bag, worn and patched, like it had traveled too far for too long. Lucia's voice broke the silence first. You're not just some distant relative. The woman met her gaze without blinking. I'm Eleanor Vasquez, Roberto's only child, the one no one ever mentions. Grace stared at her. That's not possible. The record said he had no children. Exactly the way your grandfathers wanted it, Eleanor replied. Eli swallowed. You said you're the reason this legacy is ending. Eleanor slowly unlatched her bag and pulled out a smaller, square book. She held it out, spine up. "My grandfather found the silver," she said, voice low, steady. "And your grandfather's found a bullet." She handed the book to Grace. "His journal," she said. "The second one, he kept it separate from the mining records in case anything happened. I found it hidden behind the foundation of our old family home in New Mexico. My grandmother buried it in a metal box." Grace flipped through the pages, her face paling as she read the entries. Her lips moved soundlessly until she read one aloud. "They invited me into the tunnel again today. Said they wanted to split the first shipment evenly. I didn't bring my pistol. Should have. I don't trust Silas. Or William. And Thomas, he just watches." Lucia moved next to Grace, reading over her shoulder. Then another line circled in red ink. "They'll seal it. Hide the body. Leave no one to speak my name." Reuben scoffed. "You expect us to believe your family's been sitting on this for decades? That your grandfather wrote some spooky confession and no one thought to come forward until now?" "I didn't sit on anything," Eleanor shot back. "My mother left Stillwater after Roberto vanished, changed our name, started over. She thought it was the only way to stay alive." Eli took a step forward, his voice tight. "Why come back now?" "Because your contract ends this year. Because if I didn't tell the truth now, your families would dig up what's left of this land and build a monument to murder on top of it." Grace kept turning pages in the journal, her voice almost a whisper. "He knew he was being hunted, knew they were going to kill him." Eleanor's jaw clenched. "And they did." She motioned for them to follow her. "Come on, I want you to see him." They walked in silence, lanterns bobbing deeper into the sealed part of the tunnel. The air got colder with every step. Eli didn't realize he was holding his breath until the flickering glow revealed a narrow chamber off to the right, just behind a false panel Elena pushed open. Inside, the earth had been dug out. Not far, not deep, just enough. A skeleton lay there, curled against the wall. Tattered clothing still clung to brittle bones. A small silver crucifix rested atop the ribcage, stained with time. Next to it, a leather pouch. A rusted pickaxe, and a hole in the back of the skull. Elena crouched beside the body like a priest delivering last rites. "I found him 3 months ago," she said. "The day I opened the vault." Eli swallowed hard. Reuben stood frozen. Even Lucia couldn't speak. "I brought him here," Eleanor continued. "Back to this room, back to where they ended him. I needed you to see what your bloodline is buried." Grace crouched beside the skeleton, careful not to touch it. Her voice cracked. "This wasn't just theft. This was an execution." "They wanted it all," Eleanor said. "Not just the silver, the silence." Reuben's son, Matt, took a step back, looking shaken. "Why didn't they bury him deeper? Why leave him here?" "Because they didn't think anyone would ever find him," Elena said. "This room was sealed for decades. My grandfather's map marked it as a place never to be entered. I think even he knew something wasn't right." Eli stared at the remains. His grandfather had walked these tunnels, maybe even stood in this very spot after the gunshot. Maybe Silas Langford helped cover the body. Maybe he said nothing, because the silver was worth more than a man's life. He felt sick. Eleanor stood, her voice quieter now, like the weight of her history had pressed down too far to push back against. "I didn't come to take revenge," she said. "That would have been easy. Just wait for the three of you to rip each other apart when the ore disappears." "Then why did you come?" Grace asked. "To take back what was mine," Elena said simply. "Not the silver, not even the land." She looked around the chamber, her voice heavy. "His name." Lucia stepped forward. "What happens now?" Reuben finally spoke, voice gravel. "We give him a proper burial. That's what happens." Eleanor turned to him, surprised. Reuben looked down, then at his sons. "I don't know what my grandfather did." But I know what kind of man I don't want to be. Eli nodded slowly. We do it right. No more hiding. No more secrets. Grace looked at Elena. We'll sign the land over, officially, to you. I don't want all of it, Eleanor said. Just what should have always belonged to Roberto Vasquez. That's all of it, Eli said, voice quiet but firm. He found the silver. They just found a reason to steal it. Eleanor watched him for a long moment, then nodded once. Then let's dig him out of here, and let him finally see the sun again. The burial took place the next morning. They wrapped Roberto's remains in a wool blanket. No box, no ceremony, just the quiet work of people reckoning with a history that had never belonged to them. Reuben brought a shovel. Lucia read from the journal. Grace planted a wooden marker in the soil, and Eli laid the crucifix on the grave with hands that shook, not from cold, but from clarity. When it was over, they stood in silence, watching the wind roll across the field that had once buried so much more than ore. Later that afternoon, as they gathered near the barn, Eleanor handed Eli a sealed envelope. I found this in my grandfather's things, she said. It's addressed to Jude. Eli stared at it like it might bite. I think your brother knew more than you realize, Eleanor said. And he left you something. Eli took the envelope, heart pounding, and broke the seal. Inside was a single note. When the truth comes up from the dirt, don't bury it again. Let it breathe. Let it burn if it has to. Just don't let it go unseen. Underneath, a map, hand-drawn, marked with an X far outside Stillwater. Grace looked over his shoulder. What is it? Eli folded the note slowly. I think Jude left a trail. The brother's trail. A missing sibling's shadow may be the only path left to follow. Jude wasn't lost. He was silenced. Eli Langford sat behind the wheel of his dusty Ford pickup, the envelope still open on the passenger seat beside him. The note from Jude rested on his thigh, corners fluttering with the breeze as the truck rolled out of Stillwater. The town shrank in the rearview mirror, but the weight of what they'd uncovered stayed lodged in his chest like a stone that wouldn't pass. Beside him, Grace sat quietly, flipping the map over and over in her hands. Lucia had stayed behind with Elena to arrange Roberto Vasquez's reburial and the formal deed transfer. Reuben and his sons had left without a word. The road out of town twisted through Montana's harsh open spaces, pine-studded ridges, low clouds rolling over the mountains like a slow wave of ash. Eli hadn't spoken in 20 miles. Finally, Grace broke the silence. What do you think we're going to find? Eli didn't take his eyes off the road. Answers. Or ghosts, she murmured. He gave a humorless smile. Same thing lately. The map had led them 2 hours west, beyond Stillwater's edge, toward a rundown gas station clinging to life along a forgotten stretch of road. Behind it, nothing but forest and a rusted cattle gate that hadn't been opened in years. Jude's map marked the area with one word. Home. Grace raised an eyebrow as Eli climbed out of the truck. You think he meant someone else's home or his? Knowing Jude, Eli said, grabbing a flashlight. Both. They followed the hand-drawn trail from the back of the gas station into the trees. It was narrow, barely visible under pine needles and moss, but it was there worn by boots, not animals. Jude had walked this path. After 20 minutes of silence, they came upon a small clearing. In its center stood a one-room cabin, roof patched with tin, porch sagging, chimney leaning like an old man. But the windows were intact, and the door was closed, not broken, not rotted. Eli moved first, stepping onto the porch and gripping the handle. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. A table sat beneath the front window, stacked with papers, maps, and a small oil lamp. A cot was tucked in the corner, neatly made. A wood stove rested near the wall, cold but clean. Grace stepped inside and looked around. Someone lived here recently. Eli nodded. Jude. He moved to the table, eyes scanning the documents. Letters, most unmailed. Old land records. A worn ledger with columns marked Langford, Harrow, and Cross. Grace picked up a yellowed newspaper clipping pinned to the wall. It was from 1997. Local man disappears. Stillwater, sheriff. Suspicious. 10 years, she whispered. He's been gone for 10 years and no one looked here. No one knew, Eli muttered. He didn't want to be found. At the back of the cabin was a trunk. Eli opened it. Inside, 3 things. A revolver wrapped in cloth. A copy of the original 1871 contract, annotated in Jude's handwriting. And a tape recorder. Eli turned it over. No batteries, but a cassette was still inside. A white label read simply, Langford Blood. Grace looked at him. We need to play it. Back in town, Sheriff Collier hadn't been part of the discovery under the barn, but he'd always suspected something about the Langfords' past. When Eli called, he agreed to meet them at the sheriff's office after hours. The old man leaned back in his chair as Eli laid out the contract, the letters, and finally the recorder. God damn, Collier muttered. I knew your brother was chasing something. Never thought it ran this deep. Grace leaned forward. Did he come to you before he left? Collier hesitated. Once. Real late. Said he needed protection. Said he'd found something that would crack the dirt wide open, but he wouldn't say what. Then he vanished. He shook his head. I tried to look. Got stonewalled at every turn. County clerk's office, land records, even the feds. It was like someone higher up wanted him forgotten. Eli said nothing, just slid the tape into an old deck on Collier's shelf and pressed play. Jude's voice crackled through the speaker, calm, slow, tired. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it, or maybe I did, and just never came back. Doesn't matter anymore. The truth is, our grandfathers weren't pioneers. They were thieves. They killed a man named Roberto Vasquez for the silver under Stillwater, then built a story to cover the blood. I found the tunnels. I found the ore. But I also found something worse, the people still guarding it. Crossboys, maybe even someone from the town. They threatened me, told me to leave it buried or join the bones down there. So I left. But not to run, to prepare, to make sure someone would know when the time came. Eli, I hope it's you. I hope you're the one hearing this. Because you're the only one who might still believe in doing the right thing when there's nothing left to gain. The tape clicked. Eli sat still for a moment, then leaned back, the weight of the room pressing in around him. Grace broke the silence. He wasn't running. He was documenting everything. Jude wasn't lost, Eli said quietly. He was silenced. Sheriff Collier rubbed a hand over his mouth. This blows the lid off everything. Grace pulled out the map again. There's more. This trail Jude left doesn't end at the cabin. He marked another site, a ledger location. It could be where he stored more evidence. Collier nodded. You want me to send someone? No, Eli said, standing. We'll go ourselves. This is ours to finish. The sheriff studied him. Are you sure about that? I'm not sure about anything anymore, Eli said. But I know I'm not letting my brother's voice disappear like his body did. He turned to Grace. Let's go see what else he left behind. They left the office just after midnight. Outside, the wind had picked up, pulling smoke from chimneys and sending dust spinning across the darkened street. Eli paused on the sidewalk, watching the empty town square. The statue of Silas Langford stood in the middle of it, hat in hand, eyes cast in marble confidence. A lie carved in stone. Grace came to stand beside him. Have you ever thought about tearing it down? She asked. Eli shook his head. No. Why not? Because we shouldn't erase what happened, he said. We should replace it. He glanced at her. With something honest. She nodded once. Then they turned and walked into the dark, following the trail his brother left not to find treasure, but to finish the truth, the new foundation where the past gives way to what can finally be built. You call it stolen. I call it justice delivered. The second site on Jude's map wasn't much more than a set of GPS coordinates scribbled beside a hand-drawn ridgeline. It took Eli and Grace almost 4 hours to reach it. Half of that spent driving a dirt road no one had maintained in years, the other half hiking into a dense patch of forest with trees so tall and old they seemed to watch as the two moved beneath them. The trail ended at a rock formation shaped like a crooked spine jutting out of the earth. Beneath it, obscured by brush, was what looked like the door of an old storm shelter. Steel, reinforced, padlocked, but the lock had already been broken. Eli knelt and ran his fingers over the latch. It was cleanly cut, not rusted. Someone had been here recently. Grace stood over him, holding a flashlight. You think Jude left this open? Eli shook his head. No, he was cautious to a fault. Someone came after him. He pushed the door open. The air that poured out was cold and dry, like the inside of a long-forgotten tomb. A narrow staircase descended into the dark. They entered. The space below was narrow and deep. An underground cache, reinforced with cinder block and lined with metal shelving. There were no signs of life, no cot, no table, no food. But what it lacked in comfort, it made up for in purpose. Boxes, dozens of them, carefully labelled. Grace approached one, wiped off the dust, and read aloud, Transport Logs, 2018-2022. Another read, Correspondence Silver Transfers, and another, Deposits, Southwest Coalition. Eli opened the lid. Inside were scanned copies of wire transfers, stamped invoices, deposit slips. The bank names were unfamiliar, but the amounts were massive, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds. Grace's eyes widened. This isn't just a paper trail. This is a confession. No, Eli said quietly. It's a reckoning. At the back of the room, a single folder lay open on a table. It held a printed article clipped from a small community newspaper. Silver Funds, New Clinic in Nuevo Viento, built on legacy and hope. Beneath the headline was a photo, a woman with silver hair cutting a ribbon in front of a modest medical building. Grace picked it up, her hands tightening. It's her. Elena, Eli said. A handwritten note was scribbled across the bottom of the page. They buried him to protect wealth. I dug him up to create healing. Grace turned to him. She wasn't just trying to make us see the truth. She already did something with it. Eli nodded slowly. She didn't take the silver and run. She built something. Footsteps echoed behind them. They both spun, hands instinctively reaching for the weapons they hadn't needed until now. But it wasn't a threat. It was Lucia. Her coat was damp from the forest, and her boots were caked with dirt. She stepped into the cache slowly, her eyes roaming the room. I figured you'd come here eventually, she said. Eli narrowed his eyes. How'd you find us? Jude left maps with more than one person, Lucia replied. He wanted to make sure if anything happened to him, someone else would follow the trail. Grace crossed her arms. You knew about this entire operation? Lucia nodded. Not all of it. Just what Eleanor told me. She kept the deeper details from me and from most of the family. Said it wasn't about revenge or even restitution. It was about transformation. Where's she now? Eli asked. Lucia hesitated. Gone. She said once the land was transferred and the burial was done, she was leaving Montana. Said her work was finished. Grace lifted one of the transfer documents. She funneled millions into towns across the Southwest. All of them are towns where descendants of the Vasquez family still live, Lucia said. Places where generations never had hospitals, never had schools, never had a future. Reuben's voice rang in Eli's memory. This is theft. He looked down at the stacks of papers, the financial trails, the rebirth that had been carved from a vein of blood, and then his brother's voice crackling on the tape. Let it breathe. Let it burn if it has to. Just don't let it go unseen. Eli turned back to Lucia. You call it stolen? She met his gaze. I call it justice delivered. No one said anything for a long time. Then Grace stepped toward the ledger again and opened the final folder. Inside, a list of names, family names, Vasquez, Langford, Harrow, Cross. Next to each name was a note. Some are marked with aware, some with watching, a few with trusted. Next to Jude Langford, the word was clear, alley, and beneath that, in bold handwriting, next phase, legacy. Eli pointed at it. What does that mean? Lucia shook her head. Elena didn't tell me, but I know she said something about leaving a blueprint behind. A way for this truth to keep growing. She didn't just want to expose what happened. She wanted to make sure no one could ever bury it again. Grace looked at Eli. Maybe that's what we're supposed to do next. Not just tell the story, but make sure it stays told. He nodded. We finished it. For Jude, for Roberto, for all of us. Lucia gestured to the documents. Then take them. Bring them back to Stillwater. Show them to the town, to the press, to anyone who needs to see how deep this went. Eli gathered the folders carefully, his hands more certain now. There's a meeting scheduled, Grace said. Town hall. They want to know what happens to the land now that the transfer's public. Then let's give them more than answers, Eli said. He looked around the room one last time. This wasn't a vault. It wasn't even a hiding place. It was a seed, planted deep, left behind by a man who gave up everything and a woman who refused to let it die in the dark. That night they drove back under a moon that felt heavier than usual, as if it, too, was carrying a history it never asked for. When they pulled into Stillwater, the square was empty, but the lights in the courthouse were on. People had started gathering already. Tomorrow would be the day they exposed the truth, not just the murder, not just the silver, but the movement born from it. A new legacy. Stillwater divided. When a town must choose between inheritance and integrity, truth doesn't unite a town, it exposes the fault lines it tried to forget. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood, like a room that had witnessed a century of oaths, arguments, and cover-ups. But tonight it was packed to the rafters with people who never expected to hear what they were about to. Eli stood near the front, behind a wooden podium that suddenly felt too small for the weight he carried. Grace was beside him, holding the file box like it was a sacred offering. Lucia leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Even Reuben and his sons had shown up, though it wasn't clear if they came for support or damage control. The town council members sat behind their long desk, blank-faced. Mayor Henley looked particularly tense, his tie loosened, one finger tapping the arm of his chair like a warning ticking down. Eli looked out at the crowd. They weren't angry yet, but they weren't curious either. They were waiting to be told what kind of people they were. He cleared his throat. This land, the Langford property, the Harrow Acres, the old Cross Ranch, was built on something none of us were told about, a lie that spanned generations. Murmurs rippled through the benches. Grace opened the first folder and handed a copy of the original 1871 contract to the clerk, who projected it onto the screen behind them. Eli pointed at the names. Silas Langford, William Harrow, Thomas Cross. They didn't inherit silver. They stole it. A man named Roberto Vasquez then murdered him to keep it quiet. Gasps. A few people stood, trying to speak, but the mayor raised a hand. Let him finish. Eli continued. They sealed the body beneath a hidden chamber, buried it with a pact. The contract kept the families bound in silence for 150 years. Grace stepped forward. But the silence broke. The land's deed has been officially transferred to Roberto's last living descendant, Elena Vasquez. A woman in the second row, Margie Stanton, local historian, stood, voice trembling. What proof do you have? That's a serious accusation against 3 of the town's founding families. Lucia held up the folder. You want proof? We brought it. Letters, journals, financial transfers, even a recorded confession from Jude Langford before he disappeared. She locked eyes with the crowd. He didn't run away. He was silenced because he started digging too close to the truth. That's when the noise started. Voices. Arguments. The kind that couldn't be contained. You're saying we're all descended from criminals? No, he's saying the whole town's been living on a blood mine. My grandfather built that church with silver money. Don't tell me it was cursed. Reuben stood slowly, his voice rough. What they're saying, it's true. I saw the skeleton myself. I saw the crucifix on his chest. The room stilled. Reuben went on. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to hold on to the idea that our name meant something. But I can't anymore. Not if I want to look my sons in the eye. The youngest crossboy, Matt, shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. A man near the back shouted, So what happens now? Are you giving the whole town away? No, Eli said calmly. Just the land that was taken. Elena didn't ask for more than what was hers, and she already used most of the silver to build hospitals, clinics, and schools across the Southwest. She's not trying to profit, Grace added. She did what our ancestors never did. She gave back. A woman near the side bench, Trina Holloway, a third-generation Stillwater resident, stood up. My parents mined that land for years. What are you saying about them? Eli softened. That they were used, just like the rest of us. None of us were told the truth, but now we are. And the question is, what do we do with it? Mayor Henley finally spoke, voice measured. You understand what you're asking us to accept? That the town's entire foundation is built on a lie? Eli nodded. It is. The mayor leaned forward. Then what? Tear down every building? Rename every street? No, Grace said. But maybe stop glorifying the people who made it happen. Lucia stepped in. Start honoring the ones who paid the price instead. Another voice, this one sharp, defensive. This will divide us. Eli didn't flinch. Truth doesn't unite a town. It exposes the fault lines it tried to forget. Silence followed. Heavy, cracked down the center like the land beneath Stillwater itself. Then, surprisingly, Reuben crossed to Eli and placed a heavy, calloused hand on the podium. I don't know what this town will become tomorrow, he said, looking at the people. But I know I don't want to live in a place that buries the truth just because it's uncomfortable. Eli met his eyes. Neither do I. Reuben looked toward his sons, gave a slight nod. Then maybe it's time we rebuild, this time on solid ground. Applause broke out, not loud, but steady, scattered voices rising like wind through dry grass. Others remained seated, arms crossed, silent, not convinced, not ready. But the crack had split open. After the meeting, people poured into the streets. Groups huddled in corners. Some argued, some wept, some just walked home in silence. Eli stood outside the courthouse, shoulders tense. Grace came up beside him. That went better than I expected, she said. It also got worse, he replied. Lucia joined them, tucking a file under her arm. It's not over. You know that, right? Some of them will fight this, legally, politically. I know, Eli said, but at least now it's out. Grace glanced toward the statue of Silas Langford still looming in the square. Think they'll take it down? Eli exhaled slowly. One day, Lucia raised an eyebrow. And put up what? Eli turned to them. Something honest. They didn't speak again for a while, just watched as still water shifted under its own weight, unsure whether to stand or collapse. That night, someone left a box on Eli's porch. Inside, a folded note, handwritten. You opened the door. Now see what's waiting behind it. Beneath it was another map. This one pointed to a place outside Montana, with 3 letters stamped in red, SCC. Eli stared at it, jaw tightening. Grace looked over his shoulder. What's SCC? Lucia whispered. Southwest Coalition Consortium. That's where Elena funneled most of the silver. Eli folded the map. Then we're not done yet. The network, which started in Stillwater, wasn't just a secret. It was a system. It wasn't just a cover-up. It was a blueprint passed down, refined and scaled. They drove south at sunrise, the mountains fading behind them like old stories losing shape. For miles, no one spoke. The road to Albuquerque was long and empty, but what weighed heavier than the miles was the box in the trunk full of evidence, files, names and questions Stillwater could no longer contain. Lucia tapped her fingers on the dashboard, watching dry scrubland pass outside the window. This coalition, Eleanor called it a legacy, but we still don't know what kind. Not a charitable one, Grace muttered from the back seat, reading over Jude's final notes again. Eli gripped the wheel tighter. She meant to correct the crime by building something new. But someone helped her build it. They pulled into Albuquerque by late afternoon. Jude's map led them to a warehouse district on the edge of the city. Not run down, but too clean, too discreet. At the center of the map's X was a nondescript office complex, no signage, tinted windows, a parking lot with only 5 cars. Lucia glanced at the building. Is this it? Grace nodded. According to Jude, this is the SCC's main office. Southwest Coalition Consortium. Eli parked the truck and got out. The heat hit like a wall. Everything was still. They approached the door, locked, but a keypad blinked beside the handle. Lucia pulled out an old keycard Eleanor had left in one of the boxes. She swiped it. The light turned green. They stepped inside. The building was cool, sterile, humming with quiet electricity. A front desk sat empty, but down the hallway a few doors were ajar, papers still on desks, computers in sleep mode. They moved carefully, opening file drawers and scanning through records. What they found hit harder than expected. Not just financial statements, but internal memos, communications with state officials, land acquisition plans across Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and West Texas, a full organizational chart. And at the top, E. Vasquez Director Emerita. But beneath her, listed under Operations, S. Langford Logistics, Integration. Ely frozen. Grace looked over his shoulder. Langford? Lucia blinked. Silas? Eli's voice was low. No, Sarah. His sister. Lucia stared. You never mentioned a sister. She left town after college, said Stillwater made her feel small. I haven't heard from her in years. Eli flipped to the attached employee file. It was her, Sarah Langford. Logistics. Infrastructure development. Her file dated back 6 years. Her signature was on some of the earliest plans for mine-to-foundation conversions, transportation of resources, and acquisition of disputed land claims. It wasn't just Elena, Eli said slowly. She had help. My own sister helped her build this. Lucia stepped back, stunned. Do you think she knows what it was built on? Grace looked through another folder. She didn't just know she operationalized it. Look at this. She laid out a diagram, a flowchart that tracked the redistribution of silver from hidden caches into clean development funds. clinics, schools, solar projects, all in Vasquez-identified communities, but in the margins were coded references to shell companies, off-books storage sites, quiet acquisitions of land adjacent to existing silver veins. Lucia read one line aloud: "Discretion essential. Maintain historical silence under Clause L3, 1971. She looked at them. "That's the language from the original Stillwater contract," Grace whispered. "It wasn't just a cover-up. It was a blueprint passed down, refined, and scaled." They shared a long silence. The truth was bigger than murder, bigger than Stillwater. It was systematic. Eli clenched his jaw. How many towns like ours were built on stolen ground? Lucia opened a side drawer and pulled out a hard drive. "This has to go public." "No," Grace said. "Not yet." Lucia turned to her. "Why not?" "Because if we go public without confronting the people behind it, it'll be buried again, discredited, or worse, weaponized." Eli nodded. "We need to find Sarah. Talk to her. Understand why she did this." Lucia hesitated. "You really think she'll tell you the truth?" "She's still my sister," Eli said, "and this whole thing is still my family's mess." That night, they stayed at a roadside motel just outside the city. Eli sat alone on the balcony, watching heat lightning flash over the horizon. His thoughts were a storm of betrayal and understanding. What kind of person becomes a link in a chain of justice built on buried bones? Grace came out quietly and sat beside him. "Do you think Eleanor manipulated her?" Eli shook his head. "I think Sarah made a choice, just like Jude did, just like we're making now." Grace looked down at the city lights. "You think there's more?" "I think we haven't seen the end of this. Just the middle." She was quiet for a while. Then, "You gonna be okay facing her?" Eli didn't answer at first. Then, finally, "I don't know. But I'm not going to hide from the truth. None of us should." The next morning, they traced Sarah's address to a small ranch house just outside Santa Fe. According to the records, it had been listed under a holding company for years, one of the same shell firms tied to the SCC. As they pulled up, a woman stepped out onto the porch. Silver blonde hair pulled into a braid. Tall, steady, calm. Sarah Langford. She looked at Eli with a face that didn't flinch like she'd been expecting him. "You came," she said. He got out of the truck, fists clenched. "You built something powerful," he said, "but you built it on a grave." Sarah's expression didn't change. "I built it on the truth," she replied, "because no one else would." The architect, Eli, confronts the mastermind behind the modern network, and the hardest truth yet. Justice isn't clean, Eli. It's a compromise in the mud, and sometimes you have to plant seeds in blood to grow anything at all. The porch creaked under Eli's boots as he stepped closer, the late morning heat pressing down like judgment. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, eyes steady and unreadable. The desert behind her stretched wide and empty, just like the space between them after all these years. Grace and Lucia hung back by the truck, giving him the room he didn't ask for, but needed. "You look the same," Eli said finally. Sarah smirked faintly. "You look like Dad." That stung more than he expected. He pointed back toward the highway. "We drove hundreds of miles because of what we found in Stillwater. The ledger, Jude's recordings, the cash, Eleanor's network." Sarah nodded. "And you want me to tell you why?" "No," Eli said. "I want you to explain how you justified it." She didn't blink. "Come inside." The house was quiet, full of clean angles and warm tones. Books lined the shelves, everything from economics to philosophy to mining law. On the far wall, a framed photo of Sarah shaking hands with Elena Vasquez outside a clinic in Santa Rosa. She poured him coffee and sat across the table. Nothing between them now, except the past. When did it start? Eli asked. Sarah folded her hands. 6 years ago, I was working logistics for an infrastructure non-profit in Phoenix. Eleanor tracked me down, said she wanted to talk about Stillwater. About Roberto Vasquez. You knew the story? I always suspected something, Sarah said. Jude left breadcrumbs before he disappeared, but Elena had the full picture. Eli's voice tightened. And you helped her keep burying it? Sarah shook her head slowly. No, I helped her do the opposite. I helped her rebuild from it. He pulled a folder from his bag and dropped it on the table, copies of the SCC plans, the transfers, the shell companies. This isn't rebuilding, this is laundering stolen history. Sarah opened the folder calmly and flipped through the documents. These transfers built schools in communities that had never had a library, paid for solar panels on reservations that were burning wood for heat, funded clinics in towns forgotten by the government and exploited by everyone else. Eli's voice rose. But it wasn't ours to give, Sarah. It wasn't our silver. That money came from murder. She stared at him. Justice isn't clean, Eli. It's a compromise in the mud, and sometimes you have to plant seeds in blood to grow anything at all. He stood and paced the room, fists clenched. So, you made yourself the gardener? That's what this is? I didn't take a dime for myself, Sarah said. And neither did Eleanor. Every cent went back into people, into infrastructure, into legacy. You sound like you're proud of it. I am proud of it. Eli turned sharply. Jude died for this. Sarah's voice cracked just slightly. Jude believed in it. He left me part of the map, too. He told me to protect it if he didn't come back. You knew he was in danger? He knew, she said quietly, and he went anyway. Lucia stepped into the room then, her voice firm. Why not bring the truth out first? Before the clinics, before the foundations? Why wait until someone forces your hand? Sarah stood now, facing them both. Because no one listens to brown communities crying injustice until you show them what they've built with the stolen bones. Grace followed behind Lucia, quiet but direct. And now that the truth's out? Sarah hesitated. Now it's at risk. What do you mean? Eli asked. Sarah walked to her desk and opened a drawer. She pulled out a thick envelope and handed it to him. Inside were legal papers, injunctions, court filings, corporate attempts to reclaim lands based on illegitimate transfers and fraudulent discovery. They're coming for it all, she said. Not just the land, but the entire network. Everything Eleanor built. They don't care about the truth. They care about control. And now they see an opening. Lucia's eyes narrowed. Who's they? Developers, state lobbyists, the Cross Trust, private equity firms with claims buried under 30 layers of legal fog. Grace whispered, They want the silver back. They want the narrative back, Sarah corrected. They want the story to stay buried so the land stays theirs. Eli's shoulders tensed. Then we fight them, Sarah nodded once. Then we fight. Later, as the sun began to dip below the red hills, Eli stood outside, staring at the desert again. The wind kicked up dust. A hawk circled overhead, then vanished behind a ridge. Sarah came out, holding 2 beers. She handed him one. You ever think, she said, that the Langfords never stopped digging, that we just changed the tools? Eli took a sip and said nothing for a moment. I think they buried the truth to build comfort, he said, and now we have to destroy comfort to build truth. Sarah gave a soft smile. You sound like Jude. Eli's chest ached at that. I miss him, she said. So do I. A silence settled between them, not cold, not bitter, just full of all the things they hadn't said in years. Finally, Sarah turned to him. We need to go back to Stillwater. All of us. Present the evidence, the records, the history, in public, Eli nodded. And if the town splits? Then it splits, Sarah said. but at least it splits open, not shut. That night, Eli sat in the small guest room, staring at Jude's old notebook. There was one last page he hadn't read. It was scrawled in his brother's sharp handwriting, dated a week before he vanished. "If you find this, Eli, it means I couldn't finish it, but maybe you can. Maybe we can. Don't stop at the bones. Don't stop at the truth. Build something better, even if it breaks you." Eli closed the notebook. Tomorrow they will return to Stillwater, but they wouldn't be the same people who left it. The reckoning, as Stillwater prepares to choose its future, the truth demands a final reckoning. The courthouse looked different this time. Stillwater had changed, or maybe it had just stopped pretending. The statue of Silas Langford still stood in the square, but someone had draped a black cloth over it, pinned with a handwritten sign, "History isn't heritage, it's a choice." Inside, every pew was filled. Locals sat shoulder to shoulder with people from nearby towns, reporters, lawyers, even state officials. The hum in the room wasn't just curiosity, it was reckoning, the kind that buzzes in the air before a storm breaks. Eli stood at the front, flanked by Grace, Lucia, and Sarah. Behind them, boxes of documents, audio recordings, contracts, and court filings sat stacked like an altar to truth unvarnished and undeniable. Mayor Henley leaned forward. He looked older than he had 2 weeks ago. "Mr. Langford," he said, "you've requested a public hearing not just for the transfer of land, but for what you call a full historical disclosure." Eli nodded. "That's right." The mayor gestured toward the crowd. "Then say what you came to say." Eli stepped up to the mic. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't waver. "My name is Eli Langford. I was born here, raised here. My family helped build Stillwater, or at least that's what we were taught. But what we were never told is that Stillwater was built on blood, not pride." He turned and nodded to Grace, who cued the first slide. On the projector behind them, a photo of the contract appeared, 1871, signed by Langford, Harrow, Cross, and buried beneath it Roberto Vasquez. "They killed a man for silver," Eli said. "They buried him beneath it and wrote a story over his grave, and for 150 years we believed that story." He moved through the next slides. Jude's map, the tunnel beneath the barn, the skeleton with the crucifix, the final deed transfer, Elena's clinics, the SCC, the records, the names, truth laid bare. "And now we face a choice," Eli said. "To pretend none of it matters, or to finally do something with it." Sarah stepped forward next, holding a folder. "My name is Sarah Langford. I worked with Eleanor Vasquez to redistribute the silver that was stolen, not for profit but for restoration, for education, healthcare, housing. We didn't do it to erase history. We did it to heal what history broke." A man stood from the crowd. "So, you're saying stealing is okay if it's for a good cause?" Lucia answered before Sarah could. "No. We're saying the cause wasn't theft, it was correction. The original crime was never punished. It was never even acknowledged. We did what our courts, our books, and our leaders wouldn't." Another voice. "What about us? Our homes, our families?" Grace answered. "No one's asking anyone to give up their homes, but we are asking you to stop glorifying the lie, to stop building parades and plaques around the men who buried another man alive." There was silence. Then the mayor spoke. "What would you have us do?" Eli looked around the room. At the faces, some furious, some grieving, some finally breathing truth like air. "Start by telling the truth," he said. "In your schools, your museums, your history books. Replace the statue, not with me, not with Jude, with him, Roberto Vasquez, the man whose death gave us this town." He paused. "And then give the land its name back. That stirred the room. Grace stepped in, holding up the original boundary map from before the town was called Stillwater. It was called Rio Perdido, the Lost River. That was Roberto's name for it. The room erupted in debate. Voices raised, arguments flared. But under it all was something new, momentum. A reckoning doesn't come with peace. It comes with friction. That's how you know the wheel's finally turning. A week later, the town voted. It wasn't unanimous, not even close. But it was enough. Stillwater would keep its name, but the square would become Plaza de Vasquez. The statue would come down. A new one would go up. Roberto, standing tall with a mining pick in one hand and a book in the other, truth and labor side by side. The town archives would be updated. The schools would teach what really happened. And the land surrounding the old Langford farm would be protected and held in trust for public use and education, named for Eleanor Vasquez and Jude Langford. On the day the new statue was unveiled, the sky opened up with soft rain. Not heavy, just enough to settle the dust. Eli stood with Grace and Sarah in the square, watching children run around the base of the monument. Lucia was off to the side, speaking to a journalist about the new land trust project launching across the region. Reuben Cross showed up, too. He didn't say much, just nodded at Eli as they stood beside each other in the drizzle. It was enough. Grace turned to Eli. Think he'd be proud? Eli didn't ask who she meant. He already knew. I think he'd still be digging, he said with a soft smile. They laughed quietly, then stood in silence. The statue loomed behind them. Roberto's eyes carved in bronze, looking out over a town that had finally remembered him. Later that night, Eli returned to the barn. The tunnel entrance was sealed now, officially preserved as a historical site, locked and protected, but he stood above it, hand resting on the soil. He pulled a folded note from his coat. The last one Jude had written. It had no instructions, just a sentence. You found the truth. Now make sure it lives longer than the lie. Eli set the note into the dirt and let the wind take it. Then he turned and walked back toward the house, toward tomorrow. Final message of the story. The truth doesn't fix the past. It doesn't erase the pain or bring back the lives buried by silence. But truth gives us a choice. To keep building on a cracked foundation or to tear down what's rotten and lay something stronger, even if it takes generations, even if it costs everything. Because justice isn't about what we feel, it's about what we do next.